Okay, great. Well, hi everyone. I'm just going to pull up my screen real quick and then we'll get started. Okay, great. Can everyone see that? Just like a thumbs up or something, just so we know.
I can see it.
Okay, good, great. Well, hi, my name is Grace De Vega. I am the secretary for the Weber Honors College Student Society, and today I'm going to be presenting on the WPA. Okay, so what is the WPA? This is a presentation overview. We'll be talking about what it is, how do you take it, alternatives for it, registration, studying, and then also kind of the intricacies of the paper itself, and then what to do the day of, and then afterwards, as well as some final tips and tricks. So what is the WPA? The WPA is the writing placement assessment. It's mandatory, it's part of the CSU system, and it's a part of your degree evaluation, measuring your reading, writing, and critical thinking skills. It's also a bridge between upper division and lower division classes. It's a way to assess your ability to take those upper division classes and determine your placement in an upper division writing course. Currently, because of the pandemic, we are all the WPAs will be hosted online over Canvas. And I'll be sharing this presentation afterwards. I can mail it out somehow, but all the information about it from the SDSU website is available at those two links, which I very much encourage looking at. When do I take the WPA? So students take the WPA the semester that they complete 60 units or immediately following the completion of those 60 units. Additionally, if you're a transfer student, you take it by the end of your first semester at SDSU. Make sure you take it within that time frame, because if you don't, there will be a hold on your registration. So fulfilling the WPA within that eligibility timeline is really, really important. And then just here at the bottom, I have listed a couple of the testing dates. So these last two are the ones that are still open, because those are the registration deadlines we haven't missed yet. So it's February 28th, and then Monday, March 14th, those are registration dates. And then you can see the test dates are listed here on the left-hand side. Alternatives for the WPA. So disclaimer, because of COVID, these rules are kind of changing pretty frequently. So this is the most up-to-date information that I have. But if you're unsure, you want to just get a second opinion, definitely reach out to the WPA testing services and make sure that these opportunities are still available to you all. So due to the pandemic, you have the option to take and approve upper division writing course in lieu of taking this WPA test. This class must be fulfilled within that same 60-unit time frame as taking the test, and then completion of the class with a C or higher would satisfy this WPA requirement and your degree evaluation. So how do I register for the WPA? You can register online using this link here, the SDSU testing services. It's a $45 testing fee, and then I just listed some steps as well as how to register. So you go to the website, click on current students. You can click on registration online, log in with your SDSU ID and password, select the WPA option under the exam services, pay the fee, get the registration requirements finalized, and then have a proof of registration. That's very important for having the test. Studying for the WPA. So I highly recommend, you all know your own testing abilities and your own studying habits. So find a combination that works for you. This is just a few of the ones that I found that were helpful for me and for other people who've taken it. On the website itself, there are video lectures that you can watch that kind of go over different structures and strategies that you can take. Attending workshops other than this one, I know that the WPA website hosts a couple workshops, and then those are helpful for understanding it, as well as practicing on your own. On the website itself, they have a couple like practice papers that you can write. They give you like mock articles that you can read, and then just time yourself, like do a self-timed practice, write the paper, and then bring it to the writing center. That's what I did. I wrote a mock paper, I turned it into them. They were able to give me feedback. And it was a good way to know like what they're going to be looking for on the WPA itself. So now we're going to kind of get into the nitty gritty of the WPA. So this is just going to be like a structure of the paper itself and how you're going to want to structure it and write it. At the end of the day, the WPA is a rhetorical analysis of an opinion article. It's going to have a 4-part prompt. This prompt does not change. It's going to be the same for every single exam. The only thing that changes is the article that you're reading. So just having a familiarity with this prompt, maybe memorizing the most important aspects of it beforehand, will really benefit you going into the test. The first part is identify and provide explanation of the author's argument, then identify and explaining 2 persuasive strategies and their effectiveness, identifying and discussing the assumptions within the article, and then evaluating the extent to which the audience would find the argument convincing. And that last bullet point is kind of what I just said about like having a thorough understanding of the prompt, because you're going to want to keep constantly referring back to it when you write the paper. So going more in depth, a suggested structure for the paper. This is a 5-paragraph structure that I developed, but again, to each their own, whatever you think is best for your own writing strategies, definitely follow that. But just the 5 parts that I kind of broke it down into was an intro paragraph, a paragraph for persuasive strategy number 1, paragraph for persuasive strategy number 2, a paragraph on assumptions, and then a final conclusion and a final restatement of your evaluation of the argument. So for that first paragraph, the introduction, I kind of have some guiding questions on what you should be asking yourself as you're writing this first paragraph. So for the argument, it's what is the author trying to convince the audience to believe or understand or feel about a certain issue? And then you want to discuss the author's purpose. So why are they writing this piece? What is the purpose of writing this specific article in this way? Identify the intended audience. This is really important because you will be referring to the audience throughout the rest of the paper, because you're analyzing the effectiveness on the strategies that the author has used on the audience. So if you can identify the audience at the beginning, it'll be a great way for you to constantly be referring back to it throughout the rest of your paper. And then lastly, just a clear thesis, like this is for signposting services, just as a way for the readers to understand this is what you're going to be talking about and give them that clarity. So this is kind of, I wrote a mock paper just as a kind of a way to explain how I structured it, and just a way for you all to structure it just as an option. So I read this article that's actually available on the WPA website. It's called The Military versus Wives, written by Laura Dempsey. It's available on the website. You can check it out and kind of use it as a mock paper for your own. But it was just a way to demonstrate how you would follow these steps. So this first part here, you can see that like I explain the argument, which is offering suggestions. And then I talk about the motivation for writing it. That would be the author's purpose. And then if you see later on, I address the intended audience. I get as specific as possible, which is really important for this paper, is being as specific as possible for your audience. And then those last two sentences there is just kind of the combined thesis signposting statement. So through the use of numerical repetition and emotive diction choices, the author effectively makes and defends her claim. And then the rhetorical strategies and their impacts will be analyzed in more in depth below. So that's just kind of a suggested way to structure your intro paragraph. The next 2 paragraphs will be your persuasive strategy paragraphs, if you decide to follow this specific way of structuring the paper. The question you kind of want to ask yourself is, if the author's purpose is to establish a convincing argument, what do they use to achieve that intended effect? The prompt requires that you do 2 of them. So the suggestion is to do 1 per paragraph. And a suggested paragraph structure is to first identify the strategy, then provide evidence to show that that's how you know that they are there, and then demonstrate that strategy's effectiveness. Direct quoting is going to be super valuable in this specific paragraph because it shows that you have a thorough understanding of the article and you can prove it by using direct quotes. And then I just have a couple listed strategies. You can rely on statistics, quoting, rhetorical questions, vivid imagery, syntax choices, diction choices, allusions, similes, all of those are suggestions for rhetorical strategies. And Google is a great resource for this, honestly. I just like Googled, I was like, rhetorical strategies and literary analysis. And if you look that up, it should give you a whole big list. You can kind of understand them and find the ones within the paragraph that are helpful for you. This is a sample of one of these rhetorical strategy paragraphs. So for this one, I selected deliberate diction choices. Then you can see I have direct quoting here in the paragraph. I use the quotes overlooked and unnecessary, exorbitant, and I kind of discussed those effect on the audience. So here I discussed how it was an abrasive connotation. It's a negative connotation. She wants the audience to feel uncomfortable and frustrated. And then I talk about how she uses other more affirming languages, more affirming words such as great and ease and alleviate to kind of get a more positive emotional response from the audience. And then I kind of discuss its effectiveness in the end as well. The emotional language is used to boost her credibility. It's making it an effective argument because she's utilizing these specific emotive phrases. The next paragraph is the assumption paragraph. This is often kind of the most difficult to identify because it's not explicitly listed in the paper. It's more of an implicit assumption you have to find. But the general guiding question is, what does the author assume the audience already knows, believes, understands, values? So based on this audience that you've identified, what do you think they already know? What do they already value? That's the question you want to ask yourself. And then how does the author know and address those assumptions within the paragraph? So you can kind of use the audience as kind of a clue for this. Like based on this demographic that you've identified at the beginning, what would they assume? What do they care about? Also, don't forget to identify the effectiveness of this. Again, you're evaluating its effectiveness overall. So make sure you do that in this paragraph. And just as a general rule, it's better to have one in-depth discussion of an assumption than like 2 or 3 shallow ones. this was my assumption paragraph that I wrote for this mock paper. I assumed that those who, because she's writing to military spouses, they would value military service. That's an assumption that I made based on her audience and the way that she structures her paper. And then I talk about its effectiveness. The assumption validates and reaffirms her argument from the perspective of the audience. And then I also mentioned another assumption, just as another like demonstration of it. She directs the paper towards military spouses, specifically wives. And I said that that kind of isolates another demographic, which is spouses of military people who are not wives. And so that detracts from her argument because she's forgetting and not acknowledging a whole other demographic within this paper. So you can do that as well. You can talk about its effectiveness and being like a boost of credibility, but also detracting from her argument. So then this is a final paragraph. It's evaluation and conclusion. Because you're evaluating throughout the rest of the paragraph, throughout the rest of the paper, this is kind of a reassertion of that evaluation. So make sure you're not just saving all of your evaluation stuff for this final paragraph, interweave it throughout the rest of the paper, and then use this as a way to summarize all that information as well. Another notable thing for this is the paper is not whether or not you agree with the argument, it's whether or not the argument is effective. So it's not, I agree with what they said, it's the author is effective because. And yeah, it's not your personal opinion, it's your evaluation of their opinion. And then lastly, this last bullet point is just don't stray from the focus of your paper. Make sure it's really succinct and that you're staying on topic and within the framework of the prompt. So this is just my quick little conclusion paragraph. I say that she is for the most part mindful of her audience. She makes a somewhat credible claim because she uses these strategies, but then on the other hand, she makes an assumption that would isolate a group of people. So ultimately, she delivers a mostly successful argument. And that's just kind of a way to re-summarize, reassert, recapitulate everything that you've discussed so far in the rest of the paper. So because we've kind of gone over the structure, now we're going to talk about like what you should do the day of. Make sure you have stable internet access. That's a really important thing. It's going to be on Canvas through Respondus Lockdown browser. So you have make sure you have that software on your computer before you go into it. And then also make sure you're in a space that is conductive to your exam habits. Wherever you feel most comfortable taking an exam, make sure you're in that space and within that mindset. Again, have familiarity with the prompt. That's just for your own reassurances, knowing exactly what you're going to be doing going into it. And then again, this might have changed, but since the last time I took it, it's a 2-hour exam. So this is just a suggested time breakdown that I got from when I went to a WPA practice. 15-20 minutes to read the prompt, read the article, and then kind of do some basic outlining and quick note taking about whatever you're going to be writing about. Take 80 to 90 minutes to write the paper itself, go through all those paragraphs, and then 15 to 20 minutes to revise and edit and proofread your paper before you finally submit it. And you're going to be writing it online on the computer, like typing it out. After you receive your results, this is some information. Results usually take 2 to 3 weeks and are posted on the testing services website, which is where you registered. Like I mentioned at the beginning, your score on this exam will determine your placement within the upper division writing courses. So a 10 means no class is required, an 8 is that 1 class is required, and then a 6 or lower is that 2 classes are required. You are also given the option to take the test one more time as long as it is within that 60 unit time frame that I mentioned at the very beginning. And then this last bullet point is kind of just a note. 90% of SDSU students do end up getting an 8. So there's an overwhelming chance that most SDSU students will be taking one additional WPA writing course. And then lastly, just a couple tips and tricks. This is things that I've noticed when I took it, as well as other people that I've talked to and like their advice that they have. Be as specific with the audience as possible. This is going to give you, like, demonstrate to the graders that you have a thorough understanding of the audience. And it's also going to be more easy to identify those assumptions. So not just people who read newspapers or the American public. Get as specific as possible. So like mine in that military paper was military spouses and those who have the ability to influence legislation. That's the kind of specificity you want to have with the audience. This second bullet point kind of leads into that. Make sure you're constantly referring to the audience, always tie it back to them because they're the ones you're evaluating and seeing whether or not they find the assumptions and the strategies effective. Something that people skip pretty often actually is they just skip over the title and the byline. Definitely read that because a lot of basic information is there, especially with identifying the audience. Like Laura Dempsey in that paper that I wrote, she is a military spouse. And so just by knowing that, it's an easy way to kind of find the audience right there. Don't forget to identify and explain everything you discuss. Don't just identify things. So it's not something that's like, one strategy that they use is illusions. This is effective because. Don't just say that's illusions and then skip onto effectiveness. Make sure you explain how you know that it's an illusion. cite specific evidence from the text. As I mentioned earlier, you can always argue that a strategy is ineffective or the detracts from the argument, as long as you have the proof there to back it up, as long as you can cite the text and give specific evidence to prove why it would be ineffective. That next bullet point is something that I've mentioned a couple times. It's not whether or not you agree with the paper, it's an analysis of the effectiveness. And then lastly, it's always better to kind of over-explain content than under-explain. The graders are going to be doing a lot of grading. There's a lot of WPA papers that they have to look at. So if you can be as explicit as possible with how you know things and you're checking off the boxes of that prompt, it's going to be a lot easier for them to give you the points and give you a higher grade overall. So going from a 6 to an 8 or an 8 to a 10. That was a lot of information. That's all I have for you all today. But if you have any questions, I'm here to answer any questions that you all maybe have. But thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.